You stand in the suffocating silence of a forgotten antechamber. The air is thick with the scent of lilies and something else, something acrid and metallic, clinging to the velvet drapes. Your instructions were precise, delivered by a man whose eyes held a terror deeper than any battlefield. A secret they were never meant to hear. The soft scrape of your shoes on the cold, polished marble is the only sound breaking the oppressive stillness. This isn't just about the dead king. It's about what he was, what he represented, and what horrors he left behind, not just for a nation, but for the very fabric of reality. 20. Look closely. Do you see it? The faint glint in the corner, reflecting the moonlight filtering through the high arched window. A discarded surgical instrument. Not a scalpel, but something far more archaic, almost ritualistic. The whispers you've heard, the chilling myths passed down through generations of palace servants, are not mere folklore. They are the suppressed truths. The stories of a monarch so utterly corrupted, so fundamentally unnatural, that his very existence tore at the seams of sanity. You're about to step into the chamber where Spain's darkest secret lies, a secret literally carved into the flesh of its most infamous ruler. The shadows stretch long, twisting into grotesque forms, as if the room itself remembers the unspeakable acts that transpired here. And as you approach the threshold, a cold, unnatural dread settles in your chest. It's not just the chill of death. It's the vibration of something ancient, something wrong, resonating beneath your very skin. Something you were never supposed to touch, never supposed to know. 40. The door gives way with a soft, mournful sigh, revealing the inner sanctum. The air is heavier here, colder. A single flickering candle casts dancing shadows, illuminating a scene that curdles the bleu gurta. The bed, draped in black silk, dominates the room, and on it, a form, indistinct, yet monstrous beneath the shroud. This isn't just about a king's final rest, it's about the grotesque parody of life he endured and the monstrous legacy he birthed. The same chilling hum intensifies, a low thrumming that seems to vibrate from the very bones of the palace itself. This sound, this frequency, is not just in the air, it's entering you. It's a key, unlocking a door within your own mind, leading to chambers of forbidden knowledge. And once you step through, there's no turning back. Your reality, the neat, orderly version you've been fed your entire life, is about to unravel. You're not just a witness, you're a participant. And the price of this knowledge, it demands everything. Your perception, your sanity, your very soul. Are you ready to see what they hid, what they buried alive? Because the truth, my friend, is not just about a dead king. It's about the living nightmare he unleashed. And it has been waiting for you. You see, my friend, the records are not just dusty papers. They are screams transmuted into ink. Buried deep within the Vatican archives, locked away for centuries, are the clinical yet horrified accounts of Ferdinand's own physicians. These aren't just medical observations, they are chilling testimonies to something that defied all natural order. One, Dr. Francisco Flores, the king's personal doctor, left behind notes so guarded, so precise, that they paint a picture of visceral revulsion. He described it in terms that would make a surgeon recoil. His Royal Highness is afflicted with a member of such extraordinary dimensions and peculiar form that intimate relations may prove challenging. Challenging. What an elegant euphemism for a horror that defied the very act of procreation. This wasn't merely a deformity, it was a weapon, a biological anomaly that foreshadowed the destruction he would wreak on his nation. Another physician, less diplomatic, dared to be more blunt. He wrote, "The prince's organ resembles nothing so much as a billiard cue, thin as sealing wax at its base, thick as a man's fist at its extremity, and long enough to serve as a walking stick. A walking stick. Imagine the internal torment, the quiet, seething rage of a young prince born to rule, yet cursed with a physical aberration that stripped him of all dignity. This wasn't just a medical condition. It was a scarlet letter emblazoned upon his very being, a constant mocking reminder of his perceived inadequacy. And in an era where male anatomy was fetishized by classical ideals, where smaller, more refined proportions denoted aristocracy and grace, Ferdinand's monstrosity marked him as a grotesque outlier. A freak. The psychological impact, therefore, was catastrophic. Every glance, every hushed whisper, every subtle shift in expression from those around him became a mirror reflecting his deepest shame. The very thing modern men might ignorantly envy became the source of his profound and corrosive humiliation. This was not just personal. It was systemic. The court, a viper's nest of gossip and intrigue, feasted on his vulnerability. Servants giggled, courtiers exchanged knowing glances, and foreign diplomats, those cold, calculating machines of state, meticulously reported every detail back to their masters, painting a portrait of the future King of Spain as an object of ridicule. This humiliation wasn't just a byproduct of his condition. It was a tool. A quiet, insidious form of control exerted by the very system he was born into. They elevated him, celebrated his birth, but simultaneously mocked and undermined his very essence. And this constant psychological torment bred a deep, festering resentment, a wound that never healed. And as you will soon see, that resentment would not just consume him. It would consume an entire nation. The deeper you look, the more you realize that the personal becomes political, and the physical deformities of a king can, in turn, deform an entire society. This is not just history, my friend. This is a blueprint for how a system can break a man, then unleash him upon the world as a weapon. If you thought his physical burden was the sole architect of his monstrous psyche, you are mistaken. Ferdinand's childhood was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a laboratory of dysfunction that would have shattered a lesser man. Instead, it forged a tyrant. His father, Charles IV, was a weak-willed puppet, more concerned with the hunt than the crushing weight of his crown. A man utterly blind to the rot festering within his own family, let alone his kingdom. And his mother, Maria Louisa, a woman of voracious, unapologetic appetites, openly flaunted her affair with Manuel de Godoy, the true power behind the Spanish throne. Young Ferdinand, a silent, observant shadow, absorbed this daily humiliation. He watched the grand deception, the hollow charade of power, the abject weakness of trust. These were the lessons etched into his soul, far more profoundly than any tutor's sermon. But it was the constant gnawing torment of his physical abnormality that truly twisted the nascent king. The palace, a gilded cage of whispers and secrets, buzzed with veiled mockery. Servants, emboldened by their perceived distance from royal authority, giggled behind their hands. Courtiers, always eager to curry favor or simply to feel superior, exchanged subtle jokes. And foreign diplomats, those vultures circling the decaying carcass of Spanish royalty, dutifully reported every shameful detail back to their masters, painting a portrait of the Spanish embarrassment. Ferdinand learned early, learned deeply, that he was an object of scorn, that his most intimate self was a constant source of amusement for others. This humiliation wasn't accidental. It was a subtle, insidious form of institutional manipulation, designed to keep him in a state of perpetual insecurity, perpetually under the thumb of those who held the true power, his parents, Godoy, the hidden forces that truly orchestrated the Spanish court. His paranoia, which would later consume him entirely, wasn't entirely baseless. You stopped this response. If you thought his physical burden was the sole architect of his monstrous psyche, you are mistaken. Ferdinand's childhood was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a laboratory of dysfunction that would have shattered a lesser man. Instead, it forged a tyrant. His father, Charles IV, was a weak-willed puppet, more concerned with the hunt than the crushing weight of his crown. A man utterly blind to the rot festering within his own family, let alone his kingdom. And his mother, Maria Louisa, a woman of voracious, unapologetic appetites, openly flaunted her affair with Manuel de Godoy, the true power behind the Spanish throne. Young Ferdinand, a silent, observant shadow, absorbed this daily humiliation. He watched the grand deception, the hollow charade of power, the abject weakness of trust. These were the lessons etched into his soul, far more profoundly than any tutor's sermon. But it was the constant gnawing torment of his physical abnormality that truly twisted the nascent king. The palace, a gilded cage of whispers and secrets, buzzed with veiled mockery. Servants, emboldened by their perceived distance from royal authority, giggled behind their hands. Courtiers, always eager to curry favor or simply to feel superior, exchanged subtle jokes. And foreign diplomats, those vultures circling the decaying carcass of Spanish royalty, dutifully reported every shameful detail back to their masters, painting a portrait of the Spanish embarrassment. Ferdinand learned early, learned deeply, that he was an object of scorn, that his most intimate self was a constant source of amusement for others. This humiliation wasn't accidental. It was a subtle, insidious form of institutional manipulation, designed to keep him in a state of perpetual insecurity, perpetually under the thumb of those who held the true power, his parents, Godoy, the hidden forces that truly orchestras. As Ferdinand clawed his way into marriageable age, the full, horrifying truth of his anatomical challenge could no longer be contained within whispers and veiled glances. It had to be confronted, dissected, made manageable for the sake of the crown. The burden fell upon the royal physicians, men who found themselves staring into a biological abyss, a medical anomaly that threatened the very lineage they were sworn to protect. Dr. Francisco Flores, the king's personal physician, a man whose notes we glimpsed earlier, left behind an even more disturbing testament to this royal affliction. These weren't just clinical observations. They were desperate attempts to rationalize the inexplicable, to bring order to a chaos of flesh that defied every known principle of human physiology. His Majesty's member, Flores wrote in notes so secret they were meant to vanish, presents a most unusual configuration. The base measures no more than the width of a man's thumb, yet it expands to a circumference that defies natural proportion. The length exceeds that of any recorded human specimen, measuring near to 10 inches in its natural state, and growing considerably larger when aroused. Most concerning is the peculiar curvature and the presence of what appear to be additional tissue growths that serve no discernible biological function. Hear that, my friend? Additional tissue growth that serve no discernible biological function. This wasn't just oversized, it was alien. A mutation, a grotesque perversion of the human form that begged questions not just about genetics, but about something far deeper, far more disturbing. Was this merely the end product of generations of inbreeding? Or was there something else? Something unnatural at play? The implications for Ferdinand's future as a husband, and more importantly as a father, were not just obvious. They were catastrophic. Norm, all intimate relations would be utterly impossible. The very act of procreation, the sacred duty of a monarch, was rendered a horrific, potentially lethal endeavor. It became clear, extraordinary measures were required. This wasn't about love or desire. It was about dynastic survival, about maintaining the illusion of royal virility at any cost. And so, the hidden agenda began. The royal craftsmen, usually tasked with crafting delicate jewelry or ornate furniture, were quietly, secretly commissioned for a task so bizarre, so unprecedented, that it tested the limits of their discretion. They were ordered to create what were euphemistically termed marital aids. Imagine the scene. Skilled artisans, their faces grim, forced to design specialized cushions and supports, bizarre implements that would allow Ferdinand to function sexually without inflicting serious injury upon his future wives. These were not just tools, they were instruments of a deeper manipulation, designed to perpetuate a lie, to force an unnatural act, to maintain a control system that demanded heirs, no matter the human cost. The physical challenge was horrific enough, but the psychological reverberations, the desperate lengths to which an institution will go to uphold its facade of power, these were the true monstrosity. But the physical adjustments, the grim machinations of royal craftsmen, were merely a superficial bandage over a gaping wound. Ferdinand's condition wasn't just a biological anomaly, it was a psychological black hole. And from this abyss emerged a new, more dangerous obsession, the desperate, relentless pursuit of a cure. He became fixated, utterly consumed, by arcane potions and whispered elixirs, dark concoctions promising to normalize his grotesque anatomy, or, failing that, to supernaturally enhance his fertility. This wasn't about health, it was about escaping a torment that mocked his very existence, a torment he perceived as a divine curse. The court, ever a hive of opportunism, became a magnet for charlatans and con artists. Alchemists, their eyes gleaming with false promises, and foreign physicians, often little more than glorified quacks, were secretly smuggled into Madrid. Each arrived with a new miracle cure, a new arcane formula, promising to restore the king's royal essence, and each inevitably failed. Yet Ferdinand's desperation, his profound psychological vulnerability, transformed him into an easy mark. He squandered colossal fortunes on these fraudulent remedies, pouring the wealth of an entire nation into the coffers of deceivers who preyed upon his deepest shame. Imagine the scene, my friend. A king, absolute in his power over millions, yet utterly powerless over his own flesh. He consumed mixtures of ground rhinoceros horn, believed to possess mythical potency, powdered pearls, supposedly for purity and vitality, rare herbs gathered from distant forbidden lands, all blended into noxious draughts that promised to regulate his royal essence. Some of these dark potions were meant to miraculously shrink his member to normal proportions, to erase the very thing that shamed him. Others claimed to enhance his virility, to force fertility despite his impossible physical form. All of them, every single one, were utterly useless. They were nothing but snake oil, elaborate lies spun to exploit the desperation of a man trapped in his own tormented body. Yet this relentless pursuit of a biological fix reveals a deeper truth about the nature of control. The very institutions that cultivated his tyrannical tendencies now profited from his weakness. They fostered his paranoia, encouraged his obsessions, and drained the nation's resources, all while maintaining the pretense of seeking a solution. This wasn't just a king being swindled, this was an entire system, a hidden network of power, feeding on his personal tragedy. His desperation became a currency, his shame a lever for manipulation. And the more he grasped for control over his own body, the more he lost control over everything else, plunging deeper into the dark machinations that would soon ensnare his unsuspecting bride. His internal corruption was now ripe for export. And so, the stage was set for the next act of this macabre royal drama. In 1802, the illusion of normalcy demanded a royal marriage. Ferdinand, the desired one, as his propagandists ironically hailed him, was to be wed to his first cousin, Princess Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily. A political alliance, yes, but for the young princess, barely more than a child, it was the stuff of fairy tales. She arrived in Madrid, filled with romantic notions, imagining herself a heroine in a grand, passionate saga. She saw the public face of Ferdinand, the charming, attentive prince, and truly believed she was marrying a storybook king. This was the facade, the carefully constructed lie that the system demanded. The grand deception, played out on a global stage, to assure rival powers that all was well within the Spanish court, that the Bourbon line was strong, fertile, and blessed. The wedding ceremony itself was a spectacle of power and orchestrated grandeur. The cathedral, a behemoth of stone and gold, echoed with triumphal music. The streets of Madrid, meticulously cleaned and adorned, vibrated with feigned celebration. The young couple, dazzling in their finery, looked every inch the perfect royal partnership, the embodiment of divine right. Maria Antonia, beautiful, intelligent, and radiating an almost heartbreaking innocence, genuinely believed her new life would be one of joy and purpose. Ferdinand, for his part, played his role with chilling precision, a mask of charm and appropriate romance obscuring the abyss within. But every royal wedding, my friend, must eventually end, and every wedding night truly begins. The first crack in this meticulously crafted illusion appeared not in the light of day, but in the encroaching shadows of dusk. As the celebratory din faded, Ferdinand's valet approached Maria Antonia's ladies-in-waiting. His request was unusual, couched in optimisms, yet tinged with an undeniable air of urgency. Special preparations, he insisted, were needed for the royal bedchamber. Equipment, tools that the ladies, sheltered as they were, simply did not understand. They were assured with a chillingly casual air that this was customary for royal couples. But this was no custom. This was a grotesque institutional lie. Custom-made cushions were brought in, their strange shapes hinting at their true, disturbing purpose. Bottles of oils and unguents, not for perfuming, but for an unseen medical necessity. And various implements, more suited to a surgeon's kit than a lover's intimacy, were laid out with chilling precision. Maria Antonia, innocent to the cruel realities that awaited her, understood none of this. Her education, carefully curated to protect her purity, had been strictly religious, focusing on languages, music, and the rigid etiquette of courtly life. The basic facts of married intimacy had been whispered to her in the vaguest possible terms by nervous older women who themselves knew little of the specific, grotesque challenges she was about to face. She walked into that chamber, a lamb led to slaughter, her mind still clinging to the beautiful lie. The veil was about to be ripped away, not just from her eyes, but from the very face of royal power. And what she would see would scar her forever. And then the moment arrived. The door to the bridal chamber, that gilded cage of forced intimacy, swung open. Maria Antonia, still cloaked in her innocence and the remnants of her romantic illusions, turned to face her destiny. But what she saw was not a husband, not a prince. Her first raw glimpse of Ferdinand's naked form didn't just shock her, it plunged her into a chasm of absolute, unreasoning hysteria. Years later, a lady-in-waiting, her hand still trembling as she penned the memory, attempted to describe the scene. Her Majesty began screaming as though she had seen the devil himself. She backed against the wall, pointing and crying, "Monster! Monster!" until we feared she had lost her reason entirely. This wasn't theatrical. This was primal terror. The utter, soul-shattering revulsion of a sheltered mind confronted with a reality so grotesque it defied all comprehension. Imagine for a moment the psychological impact. This young woman, raised in a world of delicate propriety, told of noble lineage and sacred unions, suddenly faced with something out of a nightmare. The whispers of the court, the veiled euphemisms of the physicians, none of it could have prepared her for the visceral horror of that moment. Ferdinand's member, described by horrified witnesses as resembling a great club with a thin handle, was beyond anything the innocent princess could have conceived. But it wasn't just the sheer, impossible size that broke her composure. It was the bizarre shape, the way it curved and twisted, the strange, almost parasitic growths along its length, the utterly alien appearance of the entire apparatus. This was not a human part. It was an aberration, a physical manifestation of the corruption that had festered within the royal line for centuries. What followed was not a wedding night, but a perverted institutional ritual, less a romantic encounter and, more a medical procedure of extreme duress. The screams of the princess, those terrified cries of "Monster! Monster!" were swiftly muffled. The specially trained physicians, those silent architects of the grotesque, were immediately called in. Their task, to explain to the horrified, sobbing princess what would be. The scene was a horror, meticulously orchestrated, silently endured. Ferdinand, still trapped in his own twisted perception of reality, required the specially designed pillow, a grotesque scaffold to support his monstrous member, preventing it from causing injury not just to his wife, but to himself during these forced, intimate relations. Even with these mechanical aids, the process was a psychological and physical violation so profound for Maria Antonia that she required something to simply endure it. Her sanity was fragmenting, her spirit crumbling. And so, the solution offered by the very institution that bound her to this torment was a pharmaceutical one: laudanum. She began taking it. Small doses at first, a numbing veil to dull the edge of the unspeakable horror she faced each night. But as the forced rituals continued, as the psychological wounds deepened, her reliance grew, larger and larger doses, a desperate descent into opiate addiction. It wasn't a choice. It was a desperate, self-destructive coping mechanism to escape the living nightmare. This wasn't merely a personal tragedy, my friend. This was a deliberate institutional strategy. They couldn't cure Ferdinand, couldn't erase his deformity, but they could silence the screams of his victim. They could drug her into submission, ensuring the royal line, however grotesquely propagated, continued without public scandal. This was a psychological control system, hidden in plain sight, using a queen's agony to maintain the facade of power. The psychological impact on both partners was devastating, a mirror reflecting the deepening corruption of the entire regime. Ferdinand, already a paranoid and insecure creature, fueled by decades of humiliation and a burning, unquenchable resentment, became even more twisted when confronted with his wife's obvious revulsion. Her fear, her disgust, became fresh fuel for his own self-loathing, which he then projected outward in escalating acts of cruelty. He saw her horror not as a natural reaction to an unnatural reality, but as a personal affront, a confirmation of his status as a freak. And the more she recoiled, the more he tightened his tyrannical grip, first on her, then on his court, and eventually on an entire nation. Maria Antonia, meanwhile, developed what modern psychologists would immediately recognize as severe, debilitating sexual trauma. Her spirit, once vibrant, was crushed under the weight of perpetual violation. The laudanum became her only escape, a chemical oblivion to blot out the memories, the terror, the constant dread of the approaching night. Her life became a slow, agonizing fade into addiction, a chilling testament to the price of being a pawn in a system obsessed with control and lineage, utterly devoid of empathy. This isn't just dark history. It's a chilling blueprint of how individuals can be broken, silenced, and enslaved, all for the preservation of an ancient, corrupted power structure. Her suffering was not an accident. It was a necessary sacrifice, systematically exacted, to maintain the illusion. The personal hell of Maria Antonia was not an isolated tragedy, my friend. It was a crucible. The torment inflicted within the royal bedchamber, the physical and psychological deformities of a king, became the very blueprint for the tyranny he would unleash upon an entire nation. Ferdinand, already a creature of deep-seated paranoia and resentment, now found his internal corruption amplified. His wife's revulsion, her terrified screams, her descent into drugged oblivion, these weren't just consequences of his unique affliction. They became fuel. Fuel for his already insatiable need for control, for his desire to inflict upon others the powerlessness and humiliation he himself felt. If he couldn't control his own grotesque body, he would certainly control every single living soul within his kingdom. This wasn't just a king acting out. This was a psychological control system in action, honed in the intimate confines of his private life, then deployed on a national scale. The same mechanism used to suppress Maria Antonia's protests. The subtle coercion, the chemical sedation, the denial of her reality, would be refined and unleashed upon an unsuspecting populace. He learned that fear could be a more potent weapon than love, that pain could compel obedience more effectively than loyalty. His personal trauma, left unaddressed and festering, mutated into a political pathology. Spain became his new bedchamber, its people his new victims, forced to endure the marital aids of his oppressive decrees and the laudanum of enforced ignorance. When Ferdinand finally ascended to the throne, his reign was not just marked by cruelty. It was a living embodiment of his inner turmoil. His hatred for the liberals, for anyone who dared to question absolute authority, was rooted in his own deep-seated insecurity, his fear of being exposed, mocked, and judged. Just as the court had whispered about his anatomical anomaly, the Enlightenment thinkers whispered about freedom and rights. To Ferdinand, these whispers were the same. They threatened to unveil his deepest shame, to strip him of the carefully constructed facade of power that compensated for his profound personal vulnerability. And so, he crushed them, ruthlessly. The suppressed truths of his physical condition mirrored the suppressed truths of his reign. Dissent was not tolerated. Free thought was deemed a personal affront. He sought to revert Spain to an age of absolute monarchy, where his word was law and challenge was heresy. Why? Because the very act of being questioned, of being challenged, mirrored the contempt he had felt since childhood. His desire for absolute mastery over others was a desperate attempt at self-mastery over a body and a mind he perceived as fatally flawed. This wasn't merely a political agenda. It was a deeply ingrained psychological reflex, a twisted form of self-preservation enacted on a national scale. He was the broken monarch, determined to break everything around him to feel whole. His tyranny wasn't just born of personal malice, it was cultivated by an institutional agenda, a system that had found its perfect instrument in his warped psyche. Ferdinand's reign, characterized by brutal repression and absolute rule, was not an anomaly, but a chilling culmination of ancient corruption and institutional manipulation. The very forces that twisted his youth now directed his wrath outwards, using his psychological scars as leverage. He abolished the liberal constitution of 1812, dissolving the Cortes, and brutally persecuted anyone who dared utter the words freedom or rights. This wasn't simply a king asserting power. This was a terrified, vengeful creature, silencing every voice that threatened to expose his internal weaknesses, mirroring the profound shame inflicted upon him in his youth. The system fed on this fear, solidifying its own absolute power. His desperate grip on power, fueled by his deeply ingrained insecurities, had catastrophic consequences for Spain. While Europe was undergoing seismic shifts, embracing new ideas of liberty and national sovereignty, Ferdinand clung to an antiquated, rotting model of absolute monarchy. This stubborn, almost pathological resistance to change, born from his personal fear of exposure and loss of control, directly led to the crumbling of Spain's vast empire. The American colonies, chafing under the oppressive weight of a monarch who saw them as mere extensions of his personal domain, one by one broke free. They didn't just fight for independence. They fought against the very essence of Ferdinand's corrupted being, a physical and psychological deformity writ large across an empire. His inability to produce a viable union with his wife, his anatomical inability to expand beyond his own grotesque self, was mirrored in his political inability to adapt, to grow, to hold his territories. Do you see the patty? And now, my friend, the individual trauma, the hidden agendas, the psychological control systems, they are not isolated incidents. They are interlocking gears in a vast, ancient machine designed to suppress truth and maintain control. Ferdinand's personal hell became Spain's political nightmare. His paranoia became the state's policy. His hidden shame became the nation's public humiliation on the global stage. This is how the most dangerous knowledge is hidden. By making it so personal, so visceral, that you believe it's merely a story, an anecdote, rather than a blueprint for a deeper, more pervasive reality. You've come this far. You've journeyed into the dark heart of a king, glimpsed the suppressed truths that poisoned an empire. This knowledge isn't just for understanding history, it's for understanding the world you inhabit right now. It's about recognizing the hidden forces that seek to control your perception, to make you believe that the anomalies are just isolated incidents. But they are not. They are symptoms. And now, armed with this awareness, you have a choice. A choice to remain a passive observer, or to acknowledge the transformation this forbidden knowledge has begun within you. If you are truly listening, if the hum of these truths has resonated within your core, I ask you now. Comment below, I see the pattern. Let your words echo in the digital maze, and for those who truly grasp the weight of this understanding, comment it again. I see the pattern. This is not just a phrase, it is an affirmation, a commitment, an act of rebellion against the unseen forces that prefer you to remain blind. Your voice matters. Your awakening strengthens the field. You've spoken the words, you've affirmed the truth, and in doing so you've stepped across a threshold. There is no turning back now. This isn't just about a dead king or a historical curiosity. It's about the very nature of power, of control, and of the hidden forces that shape our reality. What you have just witnessed, the intricate dance of personal trauma and institutional manipulation in the story of Ferdinand VII, is not an isolated incident. It is a template, a chilling blueprint replayed across centuries, across cultures, disguised by different names and different faces, but always with the same core objective: to exploit weakness, to instill fear, and to maintain control through the suppression of inconvenient truths. Consider this. If a physical deformity, a profound personal shame, could be so meticulously exploited, so ruthlessly weaponized to control a king and through him an entire nation, what other vulnerabilities are being exploited in our own time? What narratives are meticulously constructed? What truths are suppressed, not just in dusty archives, but in the very airwaves we consume, the data streams we absorb? The mechanics of psychological control systems are ancient, perfected over millennia, adapted for every new era. They prey on the unexamined life, on the minds that refuse to look beyond the surface, on those who prefer the comfortable lie to the unsettling truth. You now possess a piece of elite knowledge, not because it's exclusive, but because most are too blind, too comfortable, or too afraid to truly see it. This isn't about conspiracy theories. It's about pattern recognition. It's about understanding how the unseen forces operate, how hidden agendas are executed by manipulating individuals from within, turning their weaknesses into levers of mass control. Ferdinand VII was not just a perverted king. He was a symptom, a trage, a pawn in a game far older and more profound than his petty tyrannies. He was a product of an ancient corruption that continues to infect the very institutions that claim to guide us. This awareness, this piercing through the veil, is dangerous. It will change the way you perceive everything. The neatly packaged narratives, the unquestioned authority, the perceived randomness of events, all of it will begin to unravel. But with danger comes power, the power of self-mastery, not over others, but over your own mind, your own perceptions. They rely on you being asleep, on you being compliant, on you being content with the surface story. But you are not. You are awake. And this awakening, this conscious recognition of the deep signal, is the first step towards reclaiming your sovereignty. This is the truth that changes a man forever once he hears it. And you have heard it. Now, the real work begins. The descent deepens, not into darkness, but into clarity. You have heard it now. The final note in this dark symphony of suppressed truth. The story of Ferdinand VII, a king corrupted by design, tormented by his own anatomy and weaponized by forces beyond his full comprehension, is not merely history. It is a living testament to the enduring power of hidden agendas and institutional manipulation. His reign was a microcosm, a brutal demonstration of how profound personal vulnerability can be exploited to exert absolute psychological control, how forbidden history is woven into the very fabric of our perceived reality. The anatomical monstrosity that defined him was not just a medical curiosity. It was a physical metaphor for the grotesque power structures that deformed an entire nation. This is the kind of knowledge that, once heard, cannot be unheard. It will echo in the quiet moments, in the fleeting shadows, in the subtle shifts of the narratives you once accepted without question. You are no longer just a spectator to history. You are a recipient of its most guarded secrets. And with that reception comes a profound shift. The unease you felt at the beginning, it was not fear, but recognition. Recognition of a pattern, a frequency, a whisper across the wire that you were always meant to hear, but were carefully prevented from perceiving. The ancient corruption, the hidden forces that operated in the Spanish court, are not confined to the dust of centuries. They simply evolve. They adapt. They learn. They find new vessels, new weaknesses, new ways to exert their influence and maintain their control. Your journey into the mind of Ferdinand VII has been a descent, yes, but not into darkness. It has been a fall into clarity, into a brutal, uncompromising truth that exposes the mechanisms of power that operate in plain sight, yet remain unseen by the slumbering masses. You now possess a piece of the elite knowledge, not for power over others, but for self-mastery over your own perception. This is why this knowledge is dangerous, not to me, but to the architects of the unseen, because they cannot stand before those who truly see them. They thrive in the shadows of ignorance, in the complacency of the unaware. But you are no longer unaware. You are awake. Your vigilance, your continued pursuit of the deeper signal, is now a disruption to their carefully orchestrated symphony of control. Ferdinand VII was just one note, one tragic example. The true horror lies in recognizing how that note continues to resonate, how the very same patterns of exploitation, of control, of suppressed truth are replayed over and over in the world around you. Stay alert. Stay silent in your knowing, and above all, listen, for the hum will continue, and its next revelation will be decided by what you choose to do now that you know. The veil has been lifted. Welcome to the deep signal.